the development of software products. I took one class in college about business law. I am not a lawyer, nor a legal expert of any sort. So, and my colleagues who are attending today are not lawyers either, at least as far as I know. So I will share with you what I've learned in researching ILL copyright laws and practices in various countries, and especially what I've learned from other ILL practitioners. Their expertise has very much guided how we've implemented features that support copyright throughout WorldShare ILL and TPASA. We'll learn about supporting features from three perspectives: the patron, the borrowing library, and the supplying library. Okay, it's really four perspectives, as you'll want to understand how lenders on the other side of your borrowing requests perceive copyright, as well as when you're the lender, how you make the assessment of your own lending requests. So when your patron places a request for a copy of an article or a book chapter, you want to be upfront with them about the importance of protecting copyright. This is true when you supply a copy from your own collection, document delivery, or when you request the copy from another library via ILL. With your patrons, repetitiveness is key. I repeat. Tell them about their responsibility in upholding the copyright of the material you've supplied to them. And then tell your patron when they place the request, when you supply the request, and every time they access the document. You want your patron to understand my library is serious about upholding copyright. So your first chance to tell the patron about copyright and the appropriate, inappropriate uses of delivered material is when they place a request. You can modify the patron request form to include your copyright statement, called Copyright Declaration. You provide the statement in English or French, or both, depending on the practice at your institution. There's plenty of room in that field to include both statements, or a very, very long statement. Optionally, you can ask your patron to confirm that they accept, or you might word it, I understand. You don't have to do this, but if you word the label of the acknowledgement and the patron participates actively by clicking the checkbox, it can help to ensure compliance. If you make the checkbox required, your patron can only submit the request when they confirm they've read the statement. Implementation tip here, be sure that to watch cohort 3. That's where you learn how to configure the patron request work forms and your email notifications, which I'll share about in a little bit. So the configured statement and the checkbox will look like this on the form. Note that the checkbox value is saved to the request. If you modify the copyright statement, the declaration, you should document that somewhere in the content and the dates of when you were sharing which copyright statement, in case you would ever update that for any reason. That way you'll be saving the copyright acknowledgement from the patron, and you'll know which content, which statement went along with that, what they agreed to. Another option, you can include your statement again in the notification. So your notifications to the patron are another place to remind them. Here I've repeated some content just as an example from the recommended statement that I'll share in a few slides. You can include the copyright reminder on your new request acknowledged and or the article available in Article Exchange notifications for both document delivery and ILL requests. As these notifications are saved in request history, if you include the copyright statement in notifications, you'll have additional evidence that the patron was informed about copyright laws that apply to their delivered document. So Article Exchange is a document sharing tool that's included with TPASA and other OCLC resource sharing applications. For context, I compare it often to Dropbox or Google Docs that you might be familiar with. Article exchange is specific to ILL in that only the patron, the requesting library, and the supplying library have access to the document. Unlike other document sharing services, article exchange will expire access to the document and delete the document altogether after the expiration. Article exchange was recently updated to allow for better support of document delivery to patrons to align with the Canadian Copyright Act of 2012. In service configuration, you can customize article exchange settings to better reflect your library's policies and the copyright policies in Canada. You can customize the number of views allowed and the number of days after the first view that the patron can access the document. This should be adjusted to reflect your library's policies and the copyright policies within Canada. Please note that unless you make changes, the original default will continue to be 5 views and access for 30 days. If the number of views is set to unlimited, My Account in Discovery, the My Account page for the patron will display the expiration date but not the view countdown. As the borrowing library, documents delivered to your patrons will include your article exchange settings. This includes documents supplied by your library as document delivery, or ILL items supplied by other libraries. Your patrons will have a consistent experience with all documents that they receive. In working with other Canadian libraries to implement these settings, we landed on an unlimited number of views within 7 days. The actual requirement was 5 business days, but 7 days allowed for weekends, and it keeps the configuration simple as well as the telling of the rule to the patrons. And when your patrons do not access the document, it ultimately expires after 30 days. When configured for automatic sending, your patron will receive an email notification with the link and password for the document in Article Exchange. Alternatively, the patron may access the document directly from the My Account portal. The link in My Account combines the URL and password. Since the patron has already authenticated, there's no need to overdo it with passwords. So the patron can also see here how much longer the link will be available. You can provide text for a copyright declaration to be displayed to patrons when they access their copy of the document via Article Exchange. When a copyright compliance statement is provided, your patrons will be directed to the Article Exchange page to acknowledge that they have read the copyright compliance statement. Once the patron checks the checkbox and clicks Proceed, the document download will be processed. So this checkbox is not actually saved to the request. We still have that copyright signature that you can save at the start of a request that is saved. But this one just activates the Proceed button so that they can go on to the document. So again, just highlighting the pieces of the copyright compliance statement a bit more. You can find out more information about these settings at the URL listed here. And we will send out follow-up documents so you don't have to worry about writing that down. And we've provided an example of a copyright statement that you can use. It can be anything that you find pertinent to your library. This is just a recommendation so that, that each individual Canadian library doesn't have to rethink the message every time. And I mentioned before that there are 2 timers, essentially, for the document. The expiration date the patron sees before accessing the document is the date by which the document will be purged. Once the patron first accesses the document, the other timer is activated. Now the patron sees that they only have 7 days remaining to work with the link. Now to the business of processing ILL requests with regard to copyright. So this is when you're a staff person processing borrowing requests. So you'll want to confirm that you've evaluated the request in terms of the Canadian Copyright Act of 2012. In Canada, ILL folks refer to this as fair dealing. I recommend assigning this value with constant data that's applied to all copy requests. This assumes that you are always on the lookout for misuse or requests that go beyond what's considered fair dealing. You have the other features in place to ensure that fair dealing is your usual way of operating. If you have some different process that your staff use and you want them to explicitly set the value for copyright compliance, then you can leave this as none in constant data. You'll use the constant data record in the staff interface to update requests individually, but I cannot emphasize enough that you should be building lender strings in automation, and you can apply constant data with an automation at the same time as well. So here I'm showing an automation that's configured, an automation page that's configured with an automation for copies and one for loans, and then the one that's labeled too soon is just an extra one. The constant data you'll apply to copies should set fair dealing. Your loans automation does not require any copyright setting, and therefore it could use a constant data record that's more relevant to loans. So this is what you'll see in the staff interface when automation has set copyright compliance to fair dealing. You'll have the same option on any request to change the value as well. All right, so moving on to lending requests. When you are supplying lending requests to other libraries, you'll see the copyright compliance field as a read-only value that displays the requesting library's assignment of their compliance. In Canada, you'll know that they have two options, just as you do. And so they select fair dealing, and you'll see Canadian Copyright Act 2012, or you'll see the value none. Your assessment of copyright displays relative to your country's copyright values. When WorldShare ILL or TPASA libraries see the statement, they see it in the language in which they're viewing their application. An example, I'm showing it here in French. So we do translate that value for copyright compliance. Some lenders will not supply to a borrowing library that has not accounted for copyright. In countries that have multiple options for copyright, the lender may not care which value is selected, they only care that it's not none. In this case, if they get a request that has copyright compliance of none, they might do a conditional and say, hey, I'd be willing to fill this for you, but can you please confirm that you've assessed for copyright? So they might conditional it, or they might send an email with that same question. But it can mean that the request is filled more slowly or perhaps not at all. So it is important to make sure that you're covering for copyright. So when you get requests for copies from libraries outside of Canada, the UK, Australia, United States, you may see different statements. Some examples are shown here. Certainly, you can follow up with the library for more information and to understand their copyright environment if you have questions. But in general, you'll know that they've done their part when this value is set to anything besides none. And as I mentioned before, when other lenders are looking at your copyright assessment, you're going to be good to go if they see Canadian Copyright Act 2012. If you send requests that have none for copyright compliance, you might get questions back or slow turnaround time. Your copyright compliance choice and the patron acknowledgement, if you choose to use that, are stored with your requests, as we've discussed. The data is available when you export a list of requests from the staff interface, as well as in Report Designer. One caveat to note, the patron's signature, that acknowledgement of copyright that I said was optional, this does not display on the form view of a request in the staff interface. We initially didn't identify it as a requirement for Canadian libraries, so we didn't add it to the form. But if you do find that you use it, and especially if you feel like it is a required field, please let us know, and we can add that in. But the data is there. If you put it on your patron request forms, the data is saved to the request. And that's why I wanted to share about doing the export, and then also you'll see this data in Report Designer if you use that. So upon clicking that export, it loads an Excel document of the CSV file of the data in the request. And so this is just an example of that data. The copyright compliance fair dealing is saved in the database as CA_2012. In this way, regardless which language you see in the interface, you can be assured that the data is consistent behind the scenes. And as well, the acknowledgement is stored as not acknowledged, or I think the other value is acknowledged. And with that, I will turn it over for questions.
Stacy, there was a question in chat earlier about where to configure the request form, and I think you covered that. I was busy with WebEx logistical details, but is there any more you want to say about configuration?
Yeah, I think you will have a session on service configuration, and so I think it's called Patron Request Work Forms is the name of the page. Yeah, that's a whole session in and of itself, but I did just want to point out that that's just a couple of the fields that are available there.
And that's not a formal training session, but I think Theo covers that in some of the cohort sessions. Is that right, Theo?
That is correct. That's cohort session number 3. And they should have access to that recording.
I do see another question from Lauren. She asks, for borrowing constant data records, do I recommend having separate constant data for loans and copies? On 6 locations, so you might need 12 borrower constant data records. You might not need 12. So I do recommend, more often than not, I recommend different constant data for copies and loans. Several reasons for that, and you would have to decide on your own, but your loans are going to have an address for shipping the item to your library so the lender knows where to send it. And so for that reason, if you are having them shipped directly to the location where your patron is at, you would want different constant data based on the patron's location. The other reason is that you may have different amounts that you're willing to pay for a copy versus a loan, so you would include that in your constant data. And then, of course, the fair dealing setting is you'd want to put on the copy constant data. Probably for your different locations, because the items are being delivered by article exchange, you probably still only need one constant data record for copies, unless there's something different, again, like a different reason. So you might be willing to pay more if your patron is a different kind of patron. Maybe you're more willing to pay a higher amount for them, for example. You might assign a different constant data record in that case. And I will say, if you have specific questions about copyright, you can certainly send those to OCLC folks, and we can try to answer them. But your colleagues who are using TOPASA and WorldShare ILL are going to be the best ones to answer that. especially if it crosses international boundaries. I would include those questions in the community center and get input from the experts in the field, the actual experts.
I don't see any other questions in chat at this point. Remember, if you do have a question, you can type it in chat and send it to all participants. Also, if you prefer to ask a question verbally, you can find your name in the participants list and find that red microphone icon and click that to unmute your microphone. While we're waiting for additional questions, I will also mention that we did record this session. We will be sending out the link to the recording.
Those were good questions so far. I don't know how much I should fill the quiet time with talking. Didn't really prepare any good icebreaker copyright questions.
See any other questions in chat, and I don't see anybody requesting to be unmuted. So I guess if there are no other questions, we can probably conclude the session. What do you think, Stacy?
That would be okay with me. I mean, we are always available if you have questions along the way.
Okay, well, great. Well, thanks, everyone. And as Stacy said, if you do think of questions later, please feel free to reach out to us at OCLC. So thanks, and have a great rest of your day.